And my role today actually is just to briefly introduce our friends at Together in the UK, who are going to be hosting this event, which is an evening of poetry and questions and discussion and debate, really. Just for those of you who aren't familiar with BRAP, BRAP is an equalities charity. We've been around for about 25 years now. And we support people, organizations, communities, and places with bespoke and evidence-based approaches to learning, change, research, community engagement, anything that helps promote a more equal and fair society. And as part of that mission, a few years ago, we set up the Equality Republic. So the Equality Republic is a movement or a collective of like-minded organizations who are anxious and raring at the bit for change, organizations and people who work on equalities issues, but who recognize that we've made perhaps only limited progress in the past, that our past approaches to doing things haven't always delivered the results that we want, and who are eager to try new things, really. So at the moment, the Equality Republic has about 145 members. And as part of what we do, we send out emails just to ensure that people know about other members, so you're connected, you can hear what's going on. But also we send out invites to hear from you about what you'd like events on, what we can support you on, and things like that. So off the back of the last email we sent out, we had a reply from Teresa from Together in the UK who said, I would like to tell some Equality Republic members about the work of my organisation and the people we support. And we were only too pleased to help set up this event so we could share some of the ideas and thoughts and learning coming out of their great work. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Teresa to take us through the evening.
Hello, I'm sharing my screen. Can everybody see it? And what I'm going to do is just take you through a presentation about Together in the UK, who we are, and why I've initiated this conversation, which is sort of to do with this inspiration from this book that we've just published with Victorina Press called Hear Our Stories, which is an anthology of writings on migration. So I'll just start with a brief introduction to the organisation. So we are a social enterprise. We set up in 2016, and our mission is twofold. It's to provide a communication platform for migrants and refugees to safely share their stories, and to provide reliable advice and insights into life in the UK. So to give an example, we had an event in 2020 where 6 Vietnamese brothers told their stories of being rescued from the South China Sea 40 years ago and what had enabled them to make their life here. And afterwards, somebody said to me, we all have a story to tell, but we don't all have a platform to tell it. So we want to be that platform. The other thing about sharing advice and insights into life in the UK, see, when you come to a new country, the systems can be quite strange to you, it can be quite difficult to find your way around, and this can lead to you being exploited. So we provide advice about things like how the job market works, education, and the NHS and rights and your rights. So some of which I have learned from. For instance, if you're my age, the new marking system of 1 to 10 is quite strange. And our most popular blog, it's called Year 8 in the New Marking System. So sometimes I'm discovering things as well. Our vision is to encourage society to embrace the stories of migrants and refugees and to recognise the challenges of leaving your country of origin and starting a new life in a different country. So we are all about an inclusive society. Some of the things that we've done, we've told many stories. Some are think pieces, some are just stories of ordinary people. And we've also made 15 podcasts since the launch. We're very active on social media. We've we are mainly an online platform, so it's always worth looking at Together in the UK, all one word, .co.uk. We've published a research report on the challenges and solutions of living in the UK in 2019. In 2020, in lockdown, we started a storytelling competition, and in 2023, this year, we published the best entries. So that's how long it takes to kind of move from a competition to a book. And we've also put together a management training course on managing a migrant workforce, which we're going to pilot in November. Do subscribe if you're interested to our, and you can subscribe on our website to keep up to date with what we're doing. So that's background to us, but I want to move on now to why this conversation, because there are some interesting figures here around refugees. So those of you who work in diversity will know that the Equality Act came in 2010, and it was a really different world then, because you could see there were under 20,000 refugees recorded. And the numbers now are just going up. So 2022, 231,500 refugees, nearly 130 pending asylum cases, and nearly 6,000 stateless people in the UK. I'm taking these figures, that's UN figures. This is from a report from the Migration Observatory. They call people who came as asylum seekers and are now refugees or have a right to work asylum migrants. And they say the employment rate amongst asylum migrants is 51%, and that compares to 73% for the UK born. They also say that this is, I think, a report from 2020, asylum migrant employees earn less and work fewer hours than the UK born and other migrants. And I think Lorraine might correct me here, but you have 28 days to find accommodation, source benefits, a job once you've been given right to remain. So you're in the charge of the Home Office, they give you right to remain, and you've got 28 days to sort yourself out, which is a tiny amount of time, which I believe the government is making even smaller. So it's not only have you got to process all the trauma of why you had to leave your country, you also have quite a really tough time when you get here. So what the insights that I've got from kind of trying to hear refugee stories and from working on this book and from reading about it is there's a huge danger of exploitation of refugees. So if you're coming to a new country, you may not know that you have rights, and that leaves you open to exploitation. I also work as a diversity consultant, and I did a report on social inequality in London. And one of the recommendation was to have a rights champion in organizations to help people know their rights so they're not exploited. We need, obviously, this is a rather different approach to what you hear from some senior politicians, but we want to recognize the difficulty of having to leave your country and start again. The importance of listening and empathy. We change when we hear someone's story. So I put a copy of the book into the hands of Sundar Kartwala, who leads British Future, which is a think tank interested in migration. And he said, it's stories that change the narrative. So it's not statistics, it's actually hearing somebody's story changes things. This is, I'm sure, obvious to everyone. The world is increasingly fragile. Even before what happened in the Middle East, we know there'll be many more refugees because of climate change and obviously wars and many other things. And so it seems to me that when we work in diversity, we have to start thinking about actually what are the needs of refugees as well as all the protected characteristics. set out in the Equality Act. And organisations have an important role to play. So Enver Solomon, he put out a tweet recently, he's chairman of the Refugee Council, to say, you know, the third sector and businesses have a role to play in the integration of refugees. So it's very important, I think, that we start thinking about the needs of refugees. And I know that refugee is not an identity, it's something that happens to you, but it's an incredibly powerful and traumatic thing that happens to you. So here are stories. We published it this year. It's an anthology of writings of migration. You can buy a copy from the Victorina Press website. We set it out in some of the stages. So we set it out as in the journey, how you leave your home country. I picked up this expression, which I don't know how universal it is, about getting granted, being given your right to remain. You face discrimination. It's quite shocking what happens to some people when they come here. Then we did Making a Life and your relationship with your home country. So this is all that's set out in the book. And there are some completely brilliant entries into it, which make you hear, see, think differently. And we're very lucky tonight that we have two writers who have been published in the anthology, so who will actually give you the real experience of what it's like through their powerful writing. I'm going to ask Farisai to start, who I wrote, to me, what is an incredibly clever essay, starting with the title, An Immigrant in So Many Words. And I've asked her to read it because it's so much about the workplace. So over to you, Farisai.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me clear? Okay, I'll go ahead. It's called My Life as an Immigrant in So Many Words. I stepped out of the revolving doors feeling like $1 million, but all they saw was an overdressed and wrongly dressed immigrant. Here comes another one, they must have said to each other as I passed them. Another job will be stolen soon. Another would probably have said. Or maybe or maybe live in luxury on our sweat, step into the benefit system and never come out. I hate these immigrants. Ignorant, lazy, parasites, and thieves, he continued. The last statement is the part I heard said out loud, and I wondered who they were talking about as I walked past them, for I never imagined it could have been me. To start with, I had never heard the word immigrant before, except reading in a novel, and at that point, it was only a word that helped shape the story that I was reading. Fiction, that's all. On the other hand, even if they had added my name in their name-calling thoughts and conversations, I still would have thought they were talking about somebody else. Another Pharisee, for my view of myself was way above that. My being here was supposed to have been a short-term diversion, a therapeutic pathway to finding myself again after trauma had struck me back home in Zimbabwe. A situation that seemed to follow me everywhere I went around my country until I was at breaking point. But months later, reflecting, after I had had another label thrown at me in the workplace, I knew without a shred of doubt that what I had heard those months before was assumptions being made about me, and that made me mad. Look at her, working nonstop, practically lives here, She thinks she will be promoted to director soon, making us look bad. One co-worker complained to her colleague in the staff room while we were on our break. I acknowledged I had been working hard, long hours in almost every day of the week for weeks on end, because that was another therapeutic pathway for my tormented heart, mind, and soul. The effects of the violation I had suffered back home seemed unwilling to loosen its hold on me, even this far away. So I worked myself into stupor every day so that I would slumber at night in exhaustion and not have to toss and turn in agony of unwanted memories. Yet again, all they saw was another Black immigrant bent on disturbing their peace by stealing from their resources. Isn't it ironic that even as I contributed to the economy, I was still called a thief? Isn't it ironic still that even as I did the hard and exhausting jobs that they avoided anyway, I was still seen as a problem that they would throw out in an instant if they had a chance? Where's the love? I thought to myself. The one love, one people notion I had been taught growing up. I blinked back the tears, feeling like I was stuck between a rock and a hard surface, a hard place. I could not be back home because it represented a set of problems. And yet being here, I saw myself piling on another set of problems, but of a different kind. Lord, where do the souls of the broken find rest? I remember thinking as I sat there eating my peanut butter sandwich, and even today while in reflection, though I've managed to turn my life around, achieved a great deal, both for myself and for my community, I'm still carrying baggage of torment. As I have finally managed to drop the baggage that pushed me out of my own country, I have ironically found myself carrying another full of the torment that comes with the discrimination, racism, exclusion, minimization, and disrespect. The name calling has continued, and the accusations too. Thief, asylum seeker, parasite, ignorant, a hard to reach community, loud, aggressive, ugly, and hero. Isn't it ironic that I say hero without pleasure? This is because I do not feel like a hero, as I find myself working on the front line, risking my life, because I know I have no choice but to work there even after being flagged as a high risk of contracting the ferocious demonic virus, COVID-19. My greatest hope is that the antibodies in my system from contracting the virus at the beginning of the pandemic will keep long enough, either until the virus is eradicated or until I get the vaccine. Another scary thought. Yet I smile as I reflect, because life has taught me some lessons and I feel the need to share them. For acknowledgement of lessons learned is citation of one's own growth, development, and maturity. The ability to make lemon juice with the lemons that life throws at you. That I can safely claim to be proud of. Hidden in the ironies of my life as an immigrant is the lesson that running away from problems is not always the answer, because life is, in fact, a combination of problems and achievements. Thus, I'm here to stay and continue to make something of myself and of my community, overcoming whatever barriers are rising as I go. After all, I believe home is where the heart is, and my heart is right here in Boston. Thank you.
I know that essay so well, and it moves me every time I hear it. And the detail in it. We have a few minutes if anybody wants to give a reaction or ask Farisai a question.
I'll ask a question if that's okay. I'm just wondering how it felt for you writing it and now having it in print for everyone to read. Just what was that process like?
Having to, when I was given an opportunity to write my story, I was very excited because I had been moving around with this block of information that I felt I had no one to tell. And I don't know, it just felt like the burden was growing and growing inside. So I was really excited to just get the opportunity to offload, get it out there. Because sometimes I hear people say things about me, and I think in my head, if only they could ask me a question and I get to tell them something, I'm quite sure they would change the way they look at me, the way they see me, the way they perceive me. And I must tell you, when it was in print, it was very difficult for me to read it. Even as I'm speaking right now, I get emotional because it's even hard to hear my own story in my ears. Writing it is kind of offloading it, but hearing it with my own ears and sitting here more than 10 years after, and I'm still sitting here and I'm still carrying on and I'm still fighting. A lot of the times I wonder how I manage it. And yeah, it's difficult. But I think crying sometimes makes it easier. Sorry.
Thank you so much for reading it so beautifully and sharing the story. I hope Farisai's also going to use the anthology in her work with marginalized groups. So it's, I guess, the act of telling your story is a very powerful thing. And we've had feedback from the authors to say that they have felt seen because their work is in this book. And for all the world has gone online, what I've discovered is we still want a book. A book is still a very, very precious and beautiful thing. And the quality, I'm sure you heard the quality of Farisai's writing is really something. So I've spoken, we can come back to questions and more reflections in a minute. I'm going to now introduce Lorraine Ponella, who's written three wonderful poems that are in the anthology. Yeah, there's something rather nice here that, it's coming to the end of Black History Month, but Farisai nominated Lorraine in a blog about Black History Month to salute our sisters. One of the things that becoming interested in migration has made me ask myself, how would I cope if I was a refugee? Because we can't know. I mean, many countries we thought are stable and people end up having to flee. And there are people I would look to if the situation became mine. And Lorraine has a right to remain now, but she's been a campaigner when she was an asylum seeker. And to me, that is the most incredible courage when your life is so fragile that actually you stand up and you make a difference. So I'm going to now ask Lorraine to read her poems, and then I think she might want to share something of her story in between, because they're short poems. So over to you, Lorraine.
Thank you. And thanks so much, Farisai, for sharing your story. Thank you. So the first poem that I'll read is called We Are Dying. We are dying in isolation, alone and forlorn, with not much change, with not much hope. Even in death, there is, they don't matter. We are dying. There is no inquest. There is no investigation. Like a useless life has deservedly just gone. And no one needs to know. We are dying. Our trauma is always downplayed. Wars and bullets we witnessed, and abuse flying towards us, have made us feel unworthy, unloved, and undeserving. We are dying. We leave behind orphaned children, paralyzed by the meaninglessness of their own lives. Everything about us ignored. We are dying. The hand of oppression is heavy, but it needs not muscles to lift it off. Come out, shout. We are dying. Sing the names of the deceased. Let the world know that they too once walked this earth. We are dying. Say their names. Remind the world of lives cut short. Lives that mattered to us. We are dying. Beat the drums. Drum the call with a siren, not to war, but to a new level of consciousness that says we are humans too. Although the hostile environment says we are not. That we sing in defiance and call for recognition. That our lives matter. If not to anyone else, to us. Break the silence. We too are humans, documented or not. Spread the message of love. We are dying. We are dying. We are dying. Thank you. My name is Lorraine Mponera, as I have been introduced. I'm originally from Malawi, and yeah, I came in this country in 2008. but I've lived here as an asylum seeker from 2015 to 2022. Like Teresa said, now I have refugee status. It's been 1 year. So I'm happy that we are here today to discuss, to to have a conversation around the danger of a single story. Equality cannot exist when refugees are treated as less humans. In my opinion, there are so many dangers of a single story. For example, from the story that we heard, what Farisai just shared, where people believe things that are not true about us, about refugees, about asylum seekers. For example, where people say we are coming here only for benefits. All those negative narratives create anti-migrant, anti-refugees, and hence we see less and less of empathy. So I will also read my second poem and the last one for tonight. This poem is called New Home. I have been exposed to the love of strangers, seen smiles directed at me, and the smiling eyes with mouth covered with masks. It has been eye-opening to know that so much love exists in this city, that a homeless girl can share a life and be provided with a home away from home. It has been a learning curve to have my privileges checked closely. That a Malawian girl can speak English, possess colorful GCSEs and an award. It has really been mind-blowing to experience greatness alongside great leaders. I have seen the better side of humanity. Love instead of hate. It warms my heart that humanity is in its better place, in its care for other humans. Thank you.
I asked Lorraine to read the poem of optimism and hope, because there's two entries in the anthology that say what a difference it makes if you're reached out to, if you're acknowledged. As as I said, if somebody asks you a question, somebody's interested in you. I mean, we all need this, but when life is particularly fragile and uncertain, we need it even more. So are there any questions about the work of Together in the UK, the anthology, or to the writers about their work, or comments? It's quite a lot to take in. Kerry.
Hi, thank you. Can I just say a huge thank you to everybody for sharing their experiences and sharing their story. And also thank you to Lorraine for the invite to be here tonight. So thanks so much for that. I wanted to ask both of you, if I could, whether or not, not so much writing your story or writing your experiences, but just writing generally. Is that something that you've done before? Is it something that you're going to continue to do? Like, how did you find the actual process? Because I think you're both powerful and you're both beautiful, and I'd love to see you write things in the future. So I just wondered what your plans were.
I can start. Is that okay, Farisai?
Yeah,
Oh.
okay.
Okay. Yeah, so myself, I started writing. I went on a training. The training was organized by Migrant Voice. So we had someone who wanted to hear about stories from our communities. So I said, oh, I want to tell a story about homelessness because I'm homeless myself and all of that. So the lady said, no. Homelessness for asylum seekers it will not be appealing to the British public. Give us a different story. So I said, no, this is my story. So from that day, I always wanted to write, to tell stories. And so I attended several different things with Migrant Voice about writing, speaking. So that's how I developed. But during the pandemic, for me to start writing poetry, during the pandemic, one of the artists here in Coventry, she's called Lola Nyahuye, the founder of Maoko Arts. She asked me, because on my WhatsApp, I write, God, I love my son. So she said, what does that mean? Do you want to write it down? So I wrote the story behind it. There's a video on YouTube. I can share with it, Teresa, to share maybe with the attendees later, called God, I Love My Son. So when she was showing that video online in June 2020, some women were crying, oh, she's talking about my daughter, she's talking whom I haven't hugged, she's talking about my son, things like that. So it was that moment again, which just, and when people were referring to it, were saying, oh, that poem. I was like, oh, was it even a poem? So I just thought, okay, in this in this case, because it looks like I'm talking about myself, but it looks like I'm also talking about other people. So I might as well continue to tell our stories. And then I started exploring this idea of poetry as well. So at the moment, I still write articles. One of my articles is just coming out at 1756 tonight, and articles as well as poetry. I've also published my own anthology and all of that. Of course, I'm also expecting some more work to come out, probably beginning of 2024. That's me in short.
And I'll just say Lorraine has had an extraordinary success with her book of poems. I am not a sad poet. And Farisai, do you want to share your writing story?
Yeah, you could say I've always been writing. Growing up, I was called Jibba Jabba. I was always talking. And where I come from, women are not supposed to talk that much. You just do what you're told, and but for some reason, I'm the exact opposite. I always have something to say about everything. And I was always being told to keep quiet. So instead of speaking when I wanted to speak, and I knew I was going to be told to keep quiet, I took to the book. I would write all the stuff that I want to say, all the stuff that I know I should say that I'm going to be told not to say. I was writing. So in school, I used to write short plays and would act. And I used to do storytelling in front of people, because then I would have an audience and I would be expressing myself. But when I came to England, as I said, I came because I'd experienced trauma back home. And again, because of our culture, I was told not to talk about it with anybody, to protect my family name. And then I got here, as Lorraine said, when you get your papers, you get given 2 weeks to find accommodation, find a job, settle in, get to know your surroundings. And now, because I was already struggling with trauma, I literally was pushed into the workplace unprepared, and I really struggled. And I was struggling with the language barrier. I was struggling with culture shock, and I had no one to tell this. My own people, if you talk about struggles, you are told you have no time to feel sorry for yourself. Just get on with it. So I kind of had a breakdown, and I ended up getting counseling. And I remember the lady that was counseling me told me it helps to write things down. And I was like, actually, that's true, because I've already been doing it most of my life. So I started writing. In this case, I literally told my story from when I decided I was going to leave the country, right up to the day I started writing. And my son ended up reading some of those things, some of the things that I was writing. And he said to me, Mom, I didn't know who you were until I read what you've been writing. And I don't know why you've never told this story to people. And I tried to explain to him the culture, dynamics. But as someone who's grown up here, he could not understand. And he said, Mom, you're not in Africa anymore. You're here. You're free to express yourself. Express yourself. So I wrote the book, Healed Road to Recovery, which is on Amazon. And it talks really about the traditions in my country that are not really healthy. And it also kind of compares and contrasts some of the traditions here in England that are also not healthy. And I think the summary of it all is just that humanity is a complex thing. And we come up with these cultures and traditions on the basis of our own experiences, but then we just pawn them off to people without actually taking consideration of their own capacities. At the moment, I'm in the middle of writing 2 books. Actually, one of them is finished. It's poetry. I didn't have the confidence to get it published before because it's very personal. It's conversations with very important people to me, conversations that I know I can't have with them directly. So I'm having them in writing, and I'm gonna have them published, and hopefully they can respond to them after they've read the whole story. Because what normally happens is you start to explain yourself and people are responding in between, and you end up getting lost in the middle and you don't fully explain yourself. So in these poems, I'm going to be fully expressing myself, and the people that I wanted to have these conversations with will get to see it. And interestingly, conversations I've been having with people in Wolverhampton. Wolverhampton is very diverse. There's people from literally almost every country you can think of. And as a community champion, I get to speak to all of them. I'm learning that a lot of our stories are similar. I'm learning that the only difference that we have in most cases is skin dip. That's the color. Everything else, we are almost the same. We just never have enough open conversations. I think most of the times we talk in defense or in justification of whatever we're thinking. So yeah, that's one of the books that's going to be coming out soon. And the second book is a follow-up to Road to Recovery, and I've called it Lost Conversation. I've called it Beyond the Light at the End of the Tunnel, because I thought coming here, getting my papers would be that light beyond the end of the tunnel. But as you can imagine, it was, yes, the light at the end of the tunnel of the trauma before, and you step into another tunnel. And I know now that the life is full of these tunnels, and you always come to the light, but there will always be other tunnels. So my passion at the moment is to facilitate people navigating these tunnels and holding on to hope that you will always see the light at the end of the tunnel. That's why I'm using the book, Hear Our Stories in My Community, to kind of have these conversations.
Thank you. So, I mean, that's a wonderful actual plug for Together in the UK and Hear Our Stories, that it can be a start of conversation. I mean, one of the things that I have found doing this is many more people than I realize, people I've met have refugee experience. And it's really important, I think, that we hear it and try and understand it and find ways to have conversations about it, both just in our lives and at work. And I am now going to ask Giaz to introduce the next session when we can have reflections together. And I should have said actually right at the beginning, thank you so much to BRAP for actually facilitating this event and for responding to my request as a member of their community to say, can we do this? And particularly, of course, to Farisai and Lorraine for sharing their stories and their work. So I'm going to hand over to you now, Giaz.
Brilliant. Thank you, Teresa. And thank you, Lorraine and Farisai. That was absolutely amazing. So I said at the start that one of the things we wanted to do was give you time just to discuss some of what you've heard, but also look forward a bit and think about how we can change things within society. So in a moment, I'm going to ask my colleague Severin to put you into breakout rooms. Severin, I'm thinking 3 rooms should be, actually, if we do, can we try 4 rooms, Severin, please, if that'd be okay? And Teresa, if you get an invite to join a room, if you could stay out, that'd be good.
Oh, okay.
So we're going to spend about 15 minutes in the breakout rooms having a discussion, and we're going to ask you to address 3 questions. The first question is, what one word sums up your reaction to what you've heard so far this evening? So that could be a feeling, probably a feeling, but if it's a thought or a question or something like that. But if you could have one word that sums up your reaction to what you've heard this evening. And if you could maybe nominate someone in your breakout rooms to feedback some of those feelings and thoughts and reactions, that would be great. And then we'd like you to address 2 other questions. So the first is, and I'll put these in the chat, do existing policies and practices address the needs of refugees? And that might be in relation to your organisation, the work you do, or in wider society. And then the second question is, what more could organisations do to support refugees? And again, that might be an organisation you work with, it might be an organisation you work for, it might be an organisation in your local community that you're familiar with. So I'll put those 2 questions in the chat. Well, I hope you had the chance to have a good discussion and get into the meat of things. I'm proposing we spend just about 15 minutes or so just touching on some of the key points from the different groups. So if it's okay, I'm just going to go around the groups in turn. So the first group, I think that was Atu, Lizzie, Lorraine, and Stephen. Would anyone from your group mind feeding back just about some of the reactions to what you heard, and then some of the questions which were about how we could support refugees more?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Stephen. I work for Devon County Council and I volunteered to provide some feedback today. So just in terms of the first one, some of the words that came out were heartbreaking, inspirational, it was disheartened, resilience and touching were just some of the words that we shared as a group. In terms of question 2, we'd said that the UK was not doing what it should be doing and was really putting up barriers that prevent integration. We spoke a bit about a 2-tier system, that those perhaps that come to the UK on legal and safe routes through resettlement programs often have a very different experience. than those that have come to the UK and are deemed obviously through an asylum system as opposed to a resettled system through asylum seekers and refugees. There's this two-tier system. We also said that this has significantly changed since Brexit and COVID, where we've potentially become quite insular as a country, and there's this kind of rhetoric around taking back control around that. That's where some of this seems to have kind of even got worse, and kind of rhetoric from government in relation to that. We also said that what doesn't work is when people have refused a decision about their immigration status, about being made homeless, and the risk that poses to them as well in terms of their vulnerability significantly increased. But their needs haven't changed in relation to that in terms of still needing food and shelter, but those things are lost after those decisions are refused. And also in terms of employers and not really potentially providing sufficient support to those refugees or asylum or refugees, and not really recognising their needs sufficiently within the workplace. I'll pause on that just in case anyone from the group wanted to chip in from what I'd said and expand on what I'd said.
Okay.
If not, then I'll just jump to number 3. So we just wondered about whether the ONS, Office of National Statistics classification, and whether refugee asylum seekers should be a protected characteristic to really support integration, and whether individuals that have protected characteristics, whether that would be helpful. We also said about we need to do more to hear voices, and people need to be open to that and experience like what we've listened to and heard today and be able to recognise. And on the back of that, we said also hearing voices is important, but it's about what you do with that information, and so that people don't have to keep telling their story again. And we'd said about co-production, so that those with lived experiences actually are in the driving seat and they shape and design future service and local provision. So those that have experienced that firsthand are therefore designing what those, if you were designing an asylum system, shouldn't be me that's designing it, or designing a service to respond to asylum seekers, that shouldn't be me designing that. It should be those with lived experience that are actually designing, so that we get it right from the start and it becomes an effective service, rather than me 2 years later saying, well, I didn't know and access my service at all because I built it completely wrong and it was completely inaccessible and didn't work for people. So that co-production model there, we felt was important as well. Again, I'll pause for my group to chip in if I've missed anything.
Just while we wait for that, Stephen, could you briefly explain what protected characteristics are to anyone who may not know?
Oh, crikey.
So I don't want to put you on the spot. Yeah.
Oh, just my understanding and limited that, but would be definitions in law which would provide a level of protection to individuals, so that you couldn't be I can't think of the word.
You can be discriminated against.
Discriminated, sorry. Yeah, so you can't be discriminated against because of those factors in relation to that, in terms of your kind of your race, ethnicity, sexuality, those kind of factors. It makes it, it makes it illegal for you to be discriminated in those ways, and therefore potentially, if a refugee or asylum seeker became a protective characteristic.
That's brilliant. And I understand you're available for free legal advice after the session. Is that right?
No, please don't come to me. You can see that I'm rusty.
Teresa, you wanted to come in?
I just wanted to chip in. I think it's a really interesting idea that refugees and asylum seekers should have protected characteristics. They're set out, the protected characteristics is probably, is set out in the Equality Act. And so these are people who are deliberately given a voice in policy making, because you mustn't discriminate against say religious identity or race identity, and it is generally, it's a fixed thing, but it's not completely, because maternity is a protected characteristic. So you could actually say, well, by making refugees and asylum seekers a protected characteristic, you could make sure that that experience is heard. And it might become increasingly important as just because tragically the numbers are going to go up.
Brilliant, Teresa. I imagine there's a couple of more things you'd want to jump in on, but if it's okay with you, I'm going to move on to group 2, which was Carrie, Farisai, and Siobhan. I'm hoping you nominated someone to feedback.
We didn't, and I'm just going to look to Farisai, who I think might have been the only person with like a pen in her hand, but I might have been wrong. I don't know.
Yeah, we got thrown out before we agreed on who was going to feedback, but I'll give it a shot. Some of the words that came up in response to what we heard today was humbled, angry, powerless, emotional, inadequate, and proud. Humbled and proud was from one lady who said, proud to be working in closeness to Lorraine Panella. So she's having an experience of what it's like, like having direct experience of it, which I believe she meant is going to shed realistic light to some of the stuff that we've had today. So she's proud she's having that opportunity. And she was humbled just listening to our stories, and the realization of, what it is like to be a migrant and experience some of the stuff that she heard. And Siobhan said she was angry because the system is so unfair. There's so much pressure for us to be strong, to be resilient, as if there's no other option, when in actual fact, there are options, that should be explored. And then I said emotional from the perspective that I feel like living my story, I'm always in drive mode. I don't actually always have time to take a step back or sit back and think about the responses that I'm having to my situation. I'm just going, doing whatever I can to survive and to live through it. But listening to the story as I was reading, it was like listening to somebody else telling my story for me. It actually made me emotional because it made me realize that there is this degree of strength in me that I didn't know I have, that I didn't even realize I was exhibiting. And the two ladies were actually telling me that you're very strong, and I literally am just focused on surviving. And I had not really stopped to think about what does it take for me to be surviving under the circumstances, and that's strength. And it was humbling as well to hear somebody telling me how strong I am, because from my culture, I'm seen as a weak person because they think I just bolted from a difficult situation. I ran away from a difficult situation, which is a weakness. And I think that's one other reason why up until now, I never saw myself as a strong person. And then we agreed that the systems, the policies and stuff like that is not really adequate. Because as Siobhan says, there's a lot of pressure for migrants to be strong, to be resilient. You are forced into that mode by your situation, but the host receiving you do not put it out there, do not put enough information out there of what's available to help you recover from it so that you can become a fully contributing human being, where you are now. Because at the end of the day, I believe everybody has something to contribute. And a lot of times we don't get to contribute not because we don't want to, but because we struggle really to fit into the new dynamics that we get faced with. And the hosts, if they could do more to show us the pathways that are available that would make us fully functional, integrated people, then we would actually be doing more for the country instead of taking. I mean, a lot of times we are forced to take because we have no other way, we have no other choice. We actually would like to contribute. And yeah, so in terms of that, we agreed that it's not really it's not really adequate. And we were talking about the way it could be adequate is by involving us a bit more, having this kind of dialogue like we're having right now, even more. And also maybe placing us in places or in situations where we take the leading role. And I must say, I'm grateful to the two ladies that I was in the side group with, because they allowed me to, we didn't actually decide, but they saw I was writing, and they allowed me to take that kind of leading role. And that's the sort of thing that I'm talking about, you know, like just allowing somebody to be themselves, and then you judge them on the basis of reality, not on the basis of what's said. And from a personal perspective, I think sometimes the leadership, or should I say the government or the lawmakers and media, they generalize about migrants too much, to the point that even the common people who don't really hate end up misinformed. Because at the end of the day, I have indefinite leave to remain. Lorraine has migrant status. What status do you have?
Refugee.
Refugee status. I have a friend of my color who was born here, a citizen. But if we were to stand there on the road, the three of us, how can you tell which one is a refugee, which one has indefinite leave to remain, which one is a citizen? You can't really. And yet media portrays most of us Black people as migrants in a nutshell. And if we're painted that way, that's the way we're going to be seen by everybody, neighbor, whatever. I mean, I think leadership needs to change that narrative, honestly.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Parasite. Teresa, I think there may be things you want to jump in on, but if we could move to the third group, I'm just conscious of time, and then perhaps we could sum up some of these points together. So the third group, that was Amira, Amukor, and Shaza.
We didn't nominate someone, but I can summarize what I can remember, and then if other people want to add what they can remember. So some of the words that we came up with, a few that were mentioned, were thought-provoking, moving, but sadly not surprising. Question 2 about if enough is being done was a resounding no. Unfortunately, needs are not being met a lot of the time. It's very
Gone.
do within current government policy, lack of money, things like that. And question 3, what could be done? I mean, very big question, and we did go slightly off from the specifics of the question and more to kind of government policy rather than what local organizations can do. But we were talking about or something from my work, which is a lot of the work that I do, is working with people who are seeking asylum, who are housed in hotels and are obviously, for the most part, not allowed to work. One of the things that comes up a lot is a lot of people just want to work, and that would solve a lot of problems as well, with the government, you know, constantly repeating this discourse of, oh, it's costing us all so much money and that's why we need to deal with it. Well, let people work, and then that would solve a lot of the problem. But especially with the enormous waits. I mean, the last statistic that I heard on the average wait was something like 400 and something days for a decision on an asylum application, which is a really long time to be just waiting and waiting. And obviously that's an average, so there are going to be people who are waiting much longer than that. So yeah, letting people work, I think, would be a major thing. Other things are, with the long waits as well, more access to English lessons for people. One of the things that, I don't know if it's the same everywhere, but where we are, people can only access English lessons provided by colleges after 6 months, so 6 months from their asylum claim. So if there are no volunteer-led classes in the area, that's no English lessons for 6 months. It's a really long time. And again, you need English to be able to access services. And related to that, provision of interpreters, more provision of interpreters so that people can access services. But I mean, really, we discussed there's basically an endless list of things that could be done. And it's such a big list, it makes it quite hard to identify the specifics. But yeah, I don't know if the other people in my group, if I probably missed things, but if you want to add anything, feel free.
No, thank you so much, Amira. That was a fantastic summary from my point of view.
That was great. Thank you, Amira. Teresa, is there anything you wanted to pick up on there?
Yeah, I think these are very interesting points, and gone into a level of depth, which is fantastic in terms of thinking about it and thinking about government policy. And I've just got a few small scale things to suggest that organisations could do to make a start. So one is Refugee Week, which is in June. When I was looking, I didn't see much from employers about Refugee Week. And I know just an invitation for those who want to tell their stories to share them in Refugee Week, or to just do a really simple thing, put out a post acknowledging that it's Refugee Week. When I do my focus groups as a diversity consultant, people tell me that these small gestures matter. So that's one. I also, some of you may have been on the We Move conference run by Ronnie Mead last year. It was very interesting and important to me. And I asked a group, mainly of refugees in a room, how would you feel if organisations put refugees welcome to apply on the jobs? Would you feel sort of marginalised, or would you feel actually this is a really positive thing? And everybody in the room said it would be positive. So that's one suggestion. Another suggestion is sort of making, say, work with refugee organisations or with asylum seekers part of corporate social responsibility, and potentially having opportunities for people, internships for people to gain some experience of what the British workplace is like while they're waiting. I'm sure that you probably know this. I mean, 400 days is terrible, but I've actually met people who've been in the asylum system for 11 years, which is just crazy, because, if you're eventually given right to remain or refugee status, why wait 11 years? This particular person I'm thinking of was an academic in Iraq. And one of the things that happens is that your previous qualifications and experience don't tend to be recognised when you get here. And that's really hard and tough and terribly difficult. So if there was a way that organisations, we have a labour shortage, so there is not only a moral case, there's a business case for thinking, actually, can we find a way of reaching out better to skilled, qualified people who have a lot to offer us? So those are just some kind of thoughts, some of which are quite simple and easy to do. Things that we could do to make a difference. And I'm thinking that with policy at a government level being so difficult, organisations can really affect change at our level. There are positive things that we can do. Thank you so much to BRAP for hosting this event, and I'll hand back to you now, Gias.
Thanks. I was going to say, we didn't get a chance to hear from Sophie, Tari, and Shripana. I know we're reaching the end, but I wonder if we've got 2 or 3 minutes to hear. But I'd be particularly interested to hear your reactions to some of the words we heard this evening.
I'll pull out some snippets if that's helpful. Some 1-word, 2-word reactions was powerful. Accumulative trauma, meaning we don't have one trauma, we deal with it. We add to a bag and it just gets bigger. Thinking about the word resilience and how people must get so sick and tired of being resilient, and how that word is overused in a wrong way, where resilient is supposed to be something you pick at a moment when you need it, and not something you rely on constantly, and how often it's overused as something that you can draw upon all day, every day, 24 hours at a time. But also resilience without a goal, and how exhausting that is as well. And another word was hopelessness, but constant hopelessness, or you get a bit of faith and hope and then it stops, and then it's the same process going over and over again. We kind of done the second and third. We didn't really get to the third, but there was some elements of that within the second question that we discussed, thinking about policies and procedures within systems, and how a lot can be taken for granted in organizations where they hold assumptions and their own biases, and that there is a need to work to involve more of the refugee and migrant voice through participation and collaboration. But what we did acknowledge was that lots of decisions and policies are being made by people who have the privilege of not ever experiencing any of these traumatic experiences, whether that's refugee, whether that's racism, and all of those kind of things. And similar to what Stephen was saying earlier, that when we're talking about participation, not to just listen to the voice and go, oh yeah, we don't have money, so we can't do it, but actually, where is the action? Where is the affirmative action from hearing these voices of people and their stories? And a side note from that, although we kind of didn't discuss it quite in so much as well, is acknowledging the emotional cost of sharing your stories, of collaborating, needs to be acknowledged more, and that it shouldn't come free. So although we're doing participation would be really helpful, that shouldn't come at a free emotional cost. And that's about the summary.
That's brilliant. Thank you all for your comments and contributions. In the chat, I put a link to the Victoria Press, where you can purchase a copy of the anthology where Lorraine and Farisai's writings are. Just in the chat now, I've put a link to the Equality Republic if you'd like to become a member. Our next event is in November, and it's about how we can take collective action in a world where we're increasingly siloed in our approaches. Sorry, Lorraine, you've got your hand up. Did you want to?
Yes, I wanted to attempt to answer. There's a question in the chat about is there a way we can influence the leadership? So during the pandemic, I wanted to give an example. During the pandemic, there was an MP who talked about NRPF. So the Prime Minister was saying, oh, do you mean there are people who are not on any recourse to public fund in this country? And the MP was like, yes, I have a family which they are from Pakistan. They were not allowed to access benefits. Now they can't work during pandemic. They have nothing else to hold on to. And the Prime Minister was like, oh, no, I didn't know that exists. We'll look into that. So my answer, I guess my short answer to that is about members of parliament. I think that some of them, they do listen and they take things forward, and yeah, it's something that we can do. But there was also a mention around decisions where someone was talking about decisions are taking long. I think the Home Office can make can decide to make asylum decisions quicker. They can employ more people to do the work and then give decisions. So it's about the will to to change things. Like in our small group, someone I think mentioned the same thing, to say, I don't think this government is doing enough to, she was talking about hostility at that time. So to me, it's all part of hostility. So I guess maybe there is thinking around, if people are bored and tired, maybe they'll give in and leave and all of that, but they can make a decision to make decisions quicker. Another thing that people can do is reaching out. I survived the 7 years of homelessness and all of that because people were put direct debits, they gave me the room to live, they gave me this, they gave me that, so that's how I survived. And in the end, I still got the refugee status, and I was like, why, when I've been a refugee all along, why it took 7 years? But yeah, reaching out to people that need our support. Thank you.
But I was going to say, Lorraine, first, I was just looking over some of the words that people use to describe what you've recited to us this evening, and it's inspired, moved, powerful, humbled, angry, proud. So I'm going to do, if you're on mute, I'm going to invite you to come off mute. Actually, I think we should give our two writers a round of applause for the words this evening.
Well done, and thank you.
Thank you.
So I know there are still some questions and comments people want to make in the room. We've overrun slightly, which is completely my fault. I've badly mismanaged time, but I'm going to end it there. And just to remind you, if you want to continue the conversation, if you sign up to the Equality Republic, there's plenty more stuff which is coming out. And we hope to see you at the next event. Thank you.
Thank you.